Now I've got onboarding our newest SDR tomorrow morning, so that'd be super cool. So got a few things still to wrap up for that, which will be good. And yeah, some stuff we'll discuss on the call today anyway. But we had a lot of really cool learnings in San Francisco as well regarding our product, and basically talking to some very experienced founders, and basically telling them to rip us apart and rebuild us. The really interesting part was that almost all of them rebuilt us in the exact same way, which was a hunch that we had, which would position us in effectively an entirely new market with kind of no competitors, but half LinkedIn sales nav, half the Cognizant Zoom infos of the world, but kind of working with Clay to an extent, which is a really cool idea if we can execute on it. But we've got all the infrastructure to do it. It's just about repositioning the wordings around the product, which will be really exciting.
Interesting.
So
That's
I'm
cool.
sure we'll discuss that in bits and bobs
Yeah,
throughout the
yeah,
call
we'll get
today.
into it. So great to have you on. Everyone, this is Cory Lindsay from LoneScale, sort of founding AE, running the ship for the sales side of the business at the moment. Just got back from San Fran, so doing us a favour jumping on when he's probably a little bit jet lagged and probably
Yeah.
rather have a rest. But LoneScale, new partner of ours at Stakki, and wanted to get Cory on, understand his experience, what it's like being sort of the founding AE, building that sort of process out. Cory, great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks so much, James. Glad to be on, and yeah, excited to be part of the Stakki community as well.
Yeah, we're growing, and yeah, great to have you part of it. So, I guess first question is just right. I'd love to just delve into what you were just saying about that sort of AE role that you're in now. A lot of the where you are now is still working on elements of the messaging, how to present, how to fit into, I guess, the market of this crazy, this sales tech chaos that has been created over the last few years. But how do you navigate that as the AE at the moment?
Yeah, it's fun. It's a challenge, but it's fun. I think I always, again, having been in sales for a good 5, 6, 7 years or so, always knew that kind of go-to-market tech in general, which is where I've spent the majority of my career, is crowded at the best of times. Obviously, as soon as I joined LoneScale in October, you start to realize that it's really crowded, and there's very few like direct competitors to anyone, but everyone overlaps slightly. So, to be quite frank, I don't envy being a buyer in this kind of tech scene because it's probably quite hard to work out exactly how everything can fit into your tech stack. Hence the value of brands like Stakki as well. So it's a great challenge, right? We spend a lot of time actually testing, and we have a big focus on the cold calling channel. Again, always multi-channel, but a big
You've got a
focus.
Jabra headset on. Of course, you're a cold caller.
Exactly right. I mean, I'm one of those weirdos that really actually enjoys it as well, but that's probably for a
Yeah,
separate story. But we just find that from a feedback standpoint, it's just so much quicker. You get a
yeah,
conversation, you understand how things resonate, don't resonate. We're continuously iterating on methodologies internally in order to record that and then build upon previous learnings in order to achieve that. And in consequence, that then gets fed back pretty quickly to our product and engineering
yeah.
functions in order to, if needs be, evolve the product in certain ways. It's very rarely drastic. It's more kind of maybe certain UX, UI, different things we've got to change around. But 90+% of it is just fed straight back into the way that I'll be pitching, the way I'll be prospecting, in order to get little gains every day, every week to
Yeah.
get to the wider mission.
Interesting point there, which I'm sure, like a lot of the startups that I speak to or work with, is a case of like they want to iterate fast. Obviously, you want to get that feedback from the market quickly. So cold calling is a really good channel, but one of the things, how do you manage that? Like getting the feedback fast and giving that to the rest of the stakeholders within, versus like giving it enough time to actually properly test messaging. Have you
Yeah.
got like a rule of thumb, or how do you manage that?
Yeah, so so in terms of go-to-market, it's predominantly focused with the CEO and myself. We've got an SDR joining us actually tomorrow. He'll be awesome as well. But it's a big focus on, look, start of the week, every 2 weeks or so, what is the topic that we kind of rationalize being the case? And we kind of break up the cold call into separate sections, right? You've got the opener, kind of earn the right. You've then got you can kind of, again, there's different ways of calling it, but kind of the mini pitch, if you
Yeah,
will, which just gauges interest, 30 seconds really. Third section being the actual conversation, which is a little bit harder to test and script. I don't really like the idea of scripting much
no,
anyway, but I
hate it.
do like,
Yeah,
yeah, I see the value in the kind of the opening parts. Again, from a testing perspective, having kind of fixed variables, then it's more, again, the actual conversation is more about that kind of deep curiosity and actual genuine nature of the seller, and obviously in the close part. So the testing we're doing is almost exclusively on those first two sections, mostly section 2. Actually earning the right isn't something we've seen many challenges with up until today. But then it's that second part of how can you succinctly share the real struggles you're helping other brands solve, especially when the evidence or the symptoms of said struggles can be so wide. So it's how do you prioritize those to get the one that's really going to hit a nerve in the best way possible in order to then kind of earn the right to the next section. So we focus on that one for the most part, and it's then theorizing as much as we can and then just testing it over the course of a week or two, coming back. And when there's major kind of breakthroughs on it, that's when we kind of loop in our CTO to see if any
Nice.
changes are required.
Yeah, that seems to me like a real key area people go wrong. Like, so you have your script, and I like the term you're using, like earn the right to explain a little bit more, and then that gets you into that third part, which is genuine conversation, back and forth. You just need 30 seconds to explain some of the typical problems, some of the typical symptoms, and your goal is to get into that back and forth conversation. The number of times you see like SDRs and like founding SDRs and maybe founding AEs as well, or hopefully less so, they change their script every half day, every other day, because they think it's about like a zero sum game. It's I need to book a meeting or I don't. So it must be something in the script. You just need to earn the right, see if something could be relevant, have a genuine conversation and see where it goes, and then generate follow up, right? That's where most people's gains are coming from, which I'm sure is, I like that 4-part breakdown that you've got. And I assume that's probably how you're going to be onboarding your SDR tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly that, right. We've got various frameworks, and by no means is our playbook 100% complete. It isn't. And to some extent, a playbook should probably never be 100% complete anyway, because the market changes quicker than you can actually deal with it. But the idea is we've got a framework structure. Is it complete? No, let's call it 60 to 70% complete from an idea standpoint. But we're looking to work with him on how we can then basically iterate faster is the primary outcome. The way that I view a cold call, which is probably a bit of a kind of an answer that might not please too many people, but I don't view it as initially a way to book a meeting.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
I primarily view it as a way to start a conversation. If that leads to a meeting, which naturally is what we're looking for, perfect. Yeah. But when I previously in my career and people around me, right, we always used to go just meeting, right? I feel like you lose a lot of that authenticity and that genuine curiosity. You just go straight for the meeting, and ultimately that kind of gets, you can feel that if you're kind of trying to be sold on a cold call, right? So real focus not to lose that, and ultimately booking a good meeting is better than booking 3 meetings of which you don't know if they're going to be good or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, like, especially now in the world we're in now, right? The buyers have so much like prospecting being done to them. They're on the receiving end of like so much more noise, so many more marketplaces, reviews, all this stuff, that you really do want to just focus on the ones that are better quality. And that a key difference of like starting a conversation versus trying to like book the meeting is going to serve any SDR that you bring on, or like founding AEs, like going to serve you much better because you can lean more towards quality, and you have to protect your time because you're probably being pulled in lots of different ways. Whilst you're like the only one, you're not typically just selling. That is probably like 80% of what you do, but there's lots of little things going on in a startup that you probably can have like a meaningful impact and meaningful say on, and you get pulled in different directions, right?
100%. And that's, again, I've always worked in or moved more and more towards startups. So I started kind of at G2.com, the review platform, as they open up their office in EMEA. Unbelievable kind of structure in order to begin a sales career. Really, really invaluable to kind of what I've achieved today. But every time I've gone smaller and smaller and smaller. And now being at LoneScale has made me realize that actually the further you go down, it's an absolute exponential kind of number of projects, if you will, that you could technically be a part of, to the point where if I really didn't prioritize well, I probably won't do any prospecting, any closing, because there's enough to do elsewhere. Yeah. But is that going to be productive to the stage we're in? Absolutely not. Quite the opposite. Yeah. So it's definitely a challenge, but yeah, it's super fun at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And like your role is ultimately sales.
Yes.
So you need to prioritize really well. And you kind of alluded to it already, but the team structure on that, like go to market, that sales side at the moment, CEO, yourself, bringing on this SDR tomorrow. What is the I guess, the trigger for thinking now's the right time for that SDR in your guys' eyes?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of momentum so far in terms of we're getting closer and closer to a very deep product market fit in a very small niche. And again, we're continuously repositioning in certain ways, testing certain types of messaging, as I spoke about just a second ago. And we're at a point now where if we can up the volume of tests, by consequence, that creates meetings, opportunities, pipeline, revenue, etc. We're at a bit of a pivotal point now, which will allow us to actually start to scale a lot quicker. So that's kind of one big reason. The second one is the fact that there is so much to eat in this market. We have a very strong product. That's kind of very much validated by the customer base that we have and some of the results they're getting, which sometimes I didn't even think were particularly possible, but hey ho, turns out they are. Whereby now it's about, again, it's just that messaging piece. The product is strong, so we haven't got an issue on that side. We're still iterating very well from a pure development standpoint. It's about how can we convert that into revenue, which is where we require a bit more manpower. So we decided that the timing was right to start to scale the sales team, but ultimately in a way that whereby we do have theoretical budget for multiple headcount. We are being very, very cautious on who we bring in to the company as well.
Absolutely.
I have seen a lot of small companies that ultimately hiring is probably your biggest risk to failure, more than anything else. Even if the product's perfect, customers love you, hire wrong, everything kind of slows down. And again, I've not been in the industry for 10, 15, 20 years, but I've already kind of seen a lot of glimpses of that. So yeah, learning from those who have been before me.
Yeah, and like you're absolutely right on hiring. So you have to get it right. Like especially in that sales team where you are fairly small, you're going to be doing a lot of outbound. Outbound is hard. So you want someone who probably has that right energy, that natural curiosity, that drive, and that they're willing to learn and get a lot of things wrong because there's a trade off between like speed and quality for them to learn and upskill and work alongside you, right? Rather than maybe someone who thinks they know too much, thinks they've done it for a while before, and that's how it's done. It's not going to work in like necessarily a smaller team, right? I imagine for you guys, you want someone who's adaptable, who's going to bring a lot to the table, a lot of drive, and they're willing to get things wrong and fail fast.
100% that, and it's one of the core reasons why we chose to hire a senior SDR first,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to kind of the traditional SDR pathway of individuals who may be doing kind of career transitions or potentially
Yeah,
graduates or out of college and school, just based on bandwidth. I will always have time for coaching. However, do I have time for training in terms of the core fundamentals of just how to run a cold call, how to try and script emails, things like that, is something that I don't have as much bandwidth for. So very intentionally so, we unblocked some kind of additional budget to ensure that it was a senior individual who can effectively hit the
nice,
ground running a lot quicker into that
nice.
testing, because it won't be easy, right? Every startup is frustrating. You know you're onto something, you're just trying to find how to kind of repeat that and scale that.
Yeah,
So we needed to find someone that was ultimately aware of what the risks are and how
mm-hmm.
frustrating this is going to be,
Mm-hmm.
but also by consequence how rewarding it will be at every micro victory that you get, and which gets you closer to a point where kind of scales by itself to an extent. But we're not quite at that stage just yet, but that's the vision.
Yeah. But every faith in your product so far from everything I've seen, and that's why we partner, right?
Absolutely.
It's like it seemed like a natural point then to ask, like, let's get into maybe sort of what are the foundations of the sales tools and the process you've got at the moment, and just what else are we thinking about as you start to now scale this team? You're at this like pivotal point, like what, and we also get into a bit more of like what LoneScale is as we go through this, of course, because it's obviously one of the key tools you're using. But what's sort of your CRM? What's your foundation for the setup at the moment?
Yeah, so we operate out of HubSpot, probably the same as most kind of startups at this stage. Again, we're not huge, therefore we don't have to worry too much about the pay per contact, pay per lead kind of model, which HubSpot has, which ultimately creates a lot more kind of, let's call it headache once you get to a certain scale, and why most companies transition to Salesforce. So we operate out of HubSpot, and we do the prospecting out of there as well. So we've got HubSpot sequencer, we do the dialing, et cetera, as
Nice.
opposed to, as of today, we also leverage Lemlist
Yeah,
from a
really good.
prospecting standpoint, but it's slightly less on what I focus on. And we have, again, broader tests going on in the background, which are a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
kind of always on testing.
Okay.
as opposed to kind of more of the, let's call it the sniper approach of
Yeah,
the real tailored outreach.
I like that. That's interesting. I think one of the things that maybe it's like misplaced, or my opinion of like all the engagement tools like your sales loft outreaches and stuff, I think they have a place for sure, but they were such like they were so well positioned when they came to market, and they were so well funded that they did really well initially, and that's kind of created this environment where everyone thinks they have to have some sort of sequencer or cadencer or tool like that, and they need to put lots in it. But what you're saying is you yourself using the HubSpot sequencing and stuff. So you're doing small, controlled. You're aware of what's going on with that, and it's maybe where Lemlist you're doing, or someone else in the team maybe is doing slightly larger testing to test market feedback, a little bit of message testing and that type of stuff. And I think that's a really good place where people can still use these enablement tools
Yeah,
rather
exactly
than
that.
just letting the rest of the argo mental.
Yeah, and I wonder whether, and again, I think Outreach, Sales Loft, even like Ample Markets coming through now, which I've used once or twice in the past, great tools. My theory is that a lot of the market use them as kind of quick fixes, which resulted in volume, and ultimately that's kind of what has created I won't quite call it a downfall of that space, but it's definitely going in that direction, just because everyone's bombarded now, and therefore they're becoming exponentially less effective.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's ultimately the outcome that we've been seeing across various of our customers, and just from personal experience across various roles. So yeah, we try and keep very, very sniped in the way that we prospect. Again, there's still a place for elements of volume without going too crazy on it. If anything, actually, I'm always trying to reduce volume and just do much more tailored testing. But it's a structure that will likely kind of evolve in the coming kind of month or two
Hmm.
as we evolve beyond just the testing we're doing via cold call for the quick feedback. We can start to
Yeah.
implement that a bit more in the scaled email testing as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's you've got to take like a considered approach, right? Because the worst thing you could do in your position where you're that founding AE, just start ripping through like sequences and cadences that are too big into too many lists and just start damaging domains,
Yeah.
start annoying like your target market, and like it's the worst thing you could do. You need to be way more considered, and this is why I guess the next bit we're going to come into is your cold calling aspect
Hmm.
as well, right? But just on whilst we're at this section, where do you get that data from? Where do you find your prospects and your lists?
Yes, actually, and without making it too much of a plug, this is our own product.
Yeah.
So we don't actually use Sales Navigator internally. There might be a place for it in the near future, predominantly from like a social selling standpoint. As we're building a lot more of that at the moment, it's kind of myself and the CEO from a GTM perspective in terms of building our own personal brands. And other colleagues of ours are also posting for different reasons. But as of now, there's no LinkedIn Sales Navigator. So when it comes to, let's call it both finding the accounts, prioritizing the accounts, and finding the contacts associated, the three of those are directly within our own product. So
Which is
starting at the account level, we've kind of mapped out um, very specifically which accounts we actually care about. Up until recently, it's been exclusively Europe, and from memory, that boils down to 283 accounts that we care about today that are not customers.
yeah.
And that's filtered through a variety of things, such as do they have a marketing operations team? Do they have HubSpot and Salesforce, which are our two native integrations? Do they have between 50 and 400 sales reps? And our definition of that is basically BDRs, AEs, AMs, and leadership in that kind of total count. And there's a few other kind of criteria we look at, and it boils down to a relatively finite number of accounts. In terms of then how we prioritize them, there's various aspects within our product that we look at as
Yeah.
well.
But this is like why I liked LoneScale when me and you started speaking. Like you've got all the elements you need to build a good list with the right data and insights into those accounts, rather than having to do you know a Clay, a LinkedIn Sales Navigator, a Casper, Amplemark, like all these different things, and it's nice and clean. It can help manage all of that. The other thing you can also do, which I like about your product, is you can track, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but you can track and update all of like the CRM, the contacts already in my CRM, track their job changes, update that for me, keep that clean, so that the lists and the data that your SDR team or AE team is working on is always going to be as up to date as it can be.
Yeah, that's kind of the primary, again, based on the testing we've been doing over the last few months, it's the angle which we've seen being the most painful for most SaaS organizations, in the sense that CRMs will decay on a contact level by about 15 to 25% a year, predominantly just because they're changing jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Or they just become irrelevant, or again, it's hard to track that, and ultimately it decays very quickly. The fundamental impact that we've kind of managed to quantify is the level of trust that is now being lost with sales teams, to the point where they do not want to live in Salesforce and HubSpot. I think it's pretty fair to say that if you ask any sales rep about their opinions on a CRM, I don't think many of them are going to be positive, put it
Yeah,
that way.
yeah, 100%.
We're working out a lot of it's down to trust.
Yeah,
So they put data in CRM because they have to. That's the centralized source of truth for tracking kind of what's going on and pipeline, etc. But they don't want to use the tool beyond that, from what we've learned. So you mentioned a great use case there, which is one of the core ones we're seeing success with, is that with a click of a button, your contacts are always accurate and they're refreshed daily. So whether that's actually making sure they're in the right company, or often there's a lot of contacts missing, which are very relevant, whether that's for upsell or net new opportunity creation. Reps can go out and find them manually. That's the beauty of a sales navigator, and again, Apollo, Zoom Infos, etc. But ultimately, that's all based on the manual work, which they have to be
yeah,
doing.
yeah,
And the idea is they don't need to do that. Click of a button and it's all ready for them. And ultimately, they can then do the part which, in my opinion, is a lot more enjoyable, as opposed to just building lists. It's actually having conversations and just seeing how you can actually do what your target is supposed to be doing. It's just booking meetings, creating pipeline.
yeah. It reduces that amount of like admin work, that frustrating work that slows reps down, distracts them, breaks up their like prospecting windows, and that then reduces their time to ramp, reduces their time to target, reduces just like the quality of like focused prospecting time that they get. And that's why we've laid it all out like this, and why we want to focus on helping people pick the things that actually integrate. Is like, if you can get everything to a good list view in your CRM, and you can enable your SDR to consistently work through that, that's going to help you build pipeline over time, not necessarily adding in tons more sequences, more cadencing, and all this type of stuff. So your SDRs jumping between things. You want them to learn like good sales acumen, which is around having conversations. So enable them to have more conversations. And if a tool like LoneScale is updating that list for me, making all those little edits on to stop it decaying so fast, it's going to give me better confidence in that list. I'm going to be less call reluctant, which is a classic thing you see with SDRs as those lists get older and older.
Exactly that, right? And we focus exclusively on live data as well. So a lot of companies will go through like a Zoom Info and a Cognizant, and again, they're huge databases. And while they do a great job at keeping it as up to date as they can, there's obviously hundreds of millions of people they're trying to keep updated. So we actually have them as effectively partners. So while we go and find the contacts, keep it all kind of updated and live within your CRM, you also, customers that have them, can plug them in to our tool, and ultimately then still have the contact data of said individuals, or use some of our partners like Full Enrich or Waterfall.io, which we also provide to our customers as add-on within like a waterfall approach if they have multiple of those providers.
So is that's the only data you're using there, just LoneScale?
Yeah, when it comes to finding accounts, prioritizing them, finding contacts, it's all, well, I don't even use LoneScale for internal use. It's literally one button in my HubSpot, which is great, and it's all
Yeah.
pre-synced. Exactly. So we have Full Enrich when it comes to contact data. So emails and phones, big fan of the tool as well. And that again is plugged into our tool. We also have a very kind of small license with Lusha,
Mm-hmm.
however we want to pronounce it. But again, we don't even plug that into to our tool as of yet. We don't have enough credits with them. It's just in case Full Enrich doesn't have anything. You never quite know, so we just check Lusha just in case.
Is pretty common practice now, and like good practice, have one of the main providers and then a waterfall option. And depending on size of lists and markets, you might go with your primary provider and then the waterfall to top up, or you might just go with your waterfall and then use the primary to top up the gaps, right? Which I think is,
Exactly.
I think more so the direction people are going in now.
Yeah, and there's an interesting shift that we've seen the last kind of shortly after I joined LoneScale. The shift kind of is when I first noticed it, whereby teams will have, especially the kind of target we've got of like 50 to 400 sales reps. They will have like Zoom Info in the US, Cognism in Europe. All the reps have got
Yeah,
a big Lucia license. They've also got Casper. They've got a whole range of tools, and ultimately the actual overlap between data providers is huge. So the actual incremental value add of having a new provider gets less and less and less. So what a lot of customers are doing with LoneScale, instead of just completely cutting one out, because they all have value, they're all strong tools in their own right for their own industries, their own markets, etc. They sometimes just reduce them slightly to have a bit of a cost cut, and actually just connect them all together through LoneScale. So they can actually still have the value without the actual additional expenses, which for some of these companies can be hundreds of thousands worth
yeah,
of expenses.
such a good use case. Like I regularly talk to companies who they've bought like Zoom Info licenses for everybody in the sales team, and when you look at it on like a credit or consumption basis, your SDRs are using it loads, and everyone else is using one or two credits every so often. And so normally at those companies, they should look at something like upsell. Maybe if they, if they need all the features and like the job changing and stuff, they could do it now with LoneScale as well. But get one of these other providers that's going to create the contacts for you and give you some credits and like create the records. And then you can just go to these other providers, get everyone a license for that, and then just go to these big main providers and just get a certain number of credits to help top up and give you that like cover. You don't need everyone with these expensive licenses from the big main providers anymore.
Yeah. Again, I'm curious how the market's going to shift in this specific area, because obviously
Mm.
Zoom Info, Cognism, even Apollo, right? They've been dominating the market since I've been in sales. And now you've got tools such as Fill and Rich, for example, which we're a big fan of, that are kind of reinventing the space a little bit. So I think everyone's going to keep adapting, and I'm curious if everything's going to become waterfall, in which case we're very well positioned to help them with that, or if there's going to be a whole different direction that's going to happen. But it's the beauty
Yeah,
of sales tech to an extent. You never quite know what's going to happen next.
yeah. I think you're right. I think most things are going to move towards some level of waterfall, and the tools that are going to start to become like the biggest or most commonly used enrichment providers will be the ones that can somehow get you access to the big providers through them. So like the ones like maybe like the waterfall enrichment, which maybe it's not any of it's their own data, they're just an aggregator of some sort. Like Clay's kind of like that kind of aggregator, right? But hard to get the big providers on it yet. But I think further Clay becomes like such a big player in the market and such like a foundation, it's only a matter of time before those big providers start to interact with Clay a lot more, I think.
Exactly that, right? There'll be a point when choice is no longer an option, which again will be an interesting part, right? Because Clay's a super cool tool. To be fair, it's you can basically, if you can think of it, you can probably do it in
Yeah.
Clay. The main kind of balance that we see brands having is how much time do you want to spend building and maintaining what's in Clay, because that is literally a full-time job. Hence why we're seeing a lot of kind of GTM engineers pop up as a new kind of, let's call it a job title, especially in the last kind of year or so, or whether they want to go for kind of more plug and play options, or which one of them would be LoneScale, but we have customers that bring us into Clay as well. But yeah, super interesting kind of shift at the moment. And again, AI finally being a value add rather than the replacement is kind of my strong opinion.
Yeah.
Although it's one that's still very much up for debate with a lot of individuals as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Love those individuals, eh? The ones pushing AI SDR. They're the ones causing the biggest problems in the market, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, even then, some ASDRs, to be fair, they do. I mean, I've never actually tried them myself, but from what I've heard from people I know in the market, if you use them well and not as a replacement, they can
Yeah.
be super effective. I
Yeah.
think it's one of those whereby potentially the same story repeating itself with like a sales off outreach, where I don't think the intention of those kind of companies was to completely blast the market and prospects with emails. It was just the way that it was leveraged to do so. So I
Yeah.
wonder whether it's the
Yeah.
same repeating itself with AI SDRs, where the intention is probably not necessarily there, but again, being leveraged as such.
Yeah, exactly. And like I think you are seeing a move now. I'm seeing more people reach out, or like a lot of the messaging changing around from AI SDR. Whilst there's still more people pushing that as a whole, I also seeing a lot more like AI agents,
Yes.
like a tool that will build lists, qualify, score leads, pull in contact details, put them into cadences that you've pre-written, suggest how to write that cadence, but nothing actually gets sent or done before a human like reads it over and says, "Yeah, that's sweet, go for it." And I think that does open up the ability for maybe like the next wave of SDRs to have an AI agent just working and measuring the whole TAM constantly in the background and feeding them like the best list at any one time, and then they can just call. The only danger is that people try and like everyone's trying to time the market. So if you're only calling when stuff is surfaced, then you're probably calling the person at the same time as all of your competitors. And the real pipeline is where like the real wins and that velocity happens when you're calling consistently across your TAM, regardless of like the signals or regardless of like they're in the perfect buying window, and you're just building follow up, building follow up, building more for familiarity. You might not still speak to them until timing's right, but they've had 3 or 4 conversations with you ahead of your competitor. So there's always going to be that balance, and I think the ones who remember that there needs to be that balance are the ones who are going to succeed, and others will have a lot like harder time.
Yeah, exactly that. From what we see in terms of prioritizing accounts and contacts within our customers, there's typically one or two which are just always the consistent winners, which is again your new execs joining target accounts, or even better, it's an ex user, ex customer that's joined a target account. Those are pretty unanimous and while straightforward across most companies for the most part, with a few complications when it comes to the integration to CRMs. Parts which are always cropping up in like third, fourth best for every company are ones which cannot be replicated. To give you an
Yeah.
example, there's a few kind of developer technologies we work with, and they're like tracking GitHub repositories for certain
Mm.
types of code that are being added or removed. I mean, I'm a sales tech. I have no interest in tracking any of that for my own product
Yeah.
and things like that. But I think that's what's going to be really interesting is when people, again, you'll have kind of a baseline, X users moving to company, which is still very personal to you as a brand because it's your X users. There's going to be more and more just what is custom
Yeah.
just to
Yeah.
your brand, and ultimately you'll have to find ways to constantly find stuff that your competitors don't, because that's going to be the real fun challenge. It's going to be that everyone's going to have the same data, as you mentioned, and if everyone's got the same data, you may as well not have any of it.
Exactly that, right? And how are you then using and following up on all this data? You mentioned calling. Using which dialers are you using, or any other tools?
Yeah, so from a dialer's perspective right now, we use HubSpot dialer, and we've got multiple numbers each within HubSpot. That said, I think it is an interesting one which I'm thinking about for not so much the short term future, but maybe mid to long term, as to whether we actually bring in either a power or a parallel dialer, um,
Interesting. Yeah.
just to try and again improve that volume, especially as we're pushing more and more into the US market, more actively now as opposed to before. It was a lot more passive through kind of inbounds and referrals. Typically, the connection rates in the US are a lot weaker than that across the EMEA region,
Yeah.
which then
Definitely.
does require a bit more of that kind of dialer power. I'm always a bit conflicted on it though, because I wonder whether like it's again a new wave of like a sales loft outreach, which again, never the intention to spam via email, but it could end up being that way just based on usage.
Yeah.
So it's
I
interesting
I
one.
think the market is in the same way as sales often outreach, the other tools similar to them that came out when the market was primed for that. In the last year and a half, 2 years, we've seen all this other like this email deliverability, like all this infrastructure come into play, and that was created because of the ability to send far more, and that being given to SDRs. So then the protection against that then comes in. And then you've got power dialers over the last few years, which have grown in a little bit more a presence, I guess. I literally did like a roundtable on it this week or last week for the SDR leads of EMEA about, I think the market is primed for the next big stage in everyone's awareness, and like there'll be tools around it, is like connectivity, like tools that help manage your dialer connectivity and stuff like that, and monitor how many times have you dialed from this number, how many times have you dialed from that number, change your number, oh, you've got a flag here, and all that type of stuff. And I think largely it's a little bit of scaremongering. So if people do start building like specific tools with that and specifically for that purpose, it's a little bit of scaremongering at the moment, but it could change and it could become, actually, you do need to think about it. So I do parallel dialers, very specific use cases. I think you need to make sure you have a big enough TAM, you understand your message, you have a really shit hot caller, and you're gonna who really understands that it's not meeting or nothing, it's follow-ups, and you can also then use that power dialer on like a good list of follow-ups that you generate, to make sure you're having more connections, you're having good length of conversations, all that type of stuff.
Yeah,
So
100%. But it is right in terms of again, like Lemwarm is obviously a tool that I think we use internally as well, like basically email warm-ups, right? Multi-inbox splitting out, things like that. Native in some tools like Ample Market, and otherwise ad hoc through, there's even tools just for that, right?
yeah,
But even I had the experience when I was selling to, actually the one time I did not sell go-to-market tech, and I was selling to engineers. Again, when you can finally get hold of them, you can start building good relationships with them anyway. But I worked out that particularly AT&T and Verizon in the US, they've got some kind of built-in technology which brings, as you kind of call them on their phone, it literally mentions this could be spam.
exactly.
So that's my theory as to why connection rates are a little bit lower in the US. They seem to have a bit more of a stronger way to protect their users, which naturally so, right?
Yeah, and for the US, it's almost like that was almost the perfect introduction for Phone Burner. So Phone Burner, where most dialers and a lot of dialers, they purchase numbers and stuff from like Twilios and Bandwidth and Lumen, and a lot of the dialer infrastructure can also probably still sit with those carriers to different degrees. So when you use more common dialers, which people would have heard of, like several of the ones here, different amounts of their infrastructure are built on those high level carriers. Whilst Phone Burner, they built direct relationships with all the carriers themselves. So they have relationships with AT&T, they have relationships with Verizon. So if they ever see one of the numbers you're using get a flag on it, they contact the carrier, they negotiate, they get it removed, and they just do all of that in the background for you. So your connection rates with Phone Burner in the States are going to be much, much higher than with other dialers in the States. Front spin, similar as well, and they do that in Europe as well. They are just like a normal dialer, but they do have a parallel option now because they felt they needed to sort of have that feature for some of the clients that want it. Definitely worth a look at.
Yeah, it's
Phone Burner
interesting.
in the
Hadn't heard of them
States,
before.
you can do that, or front spin for both of them.
Yeah.
So feels like, are there any other tools then which we kind of haven't mentioned, which you're dying
So
to use or dying to look at?
yeah, so as of now, no. Like we've got a very lean tech setup. We've kind of gone back to basics, just knowing who to talk to and why, and ultimately how you talk to them is almost a step afterwards if you really want to optimize that. The actual scale we've got works well as of today. So broader tools I'm curious about, and it's slightly less on the prospecting side, but is one that I can't stop hearing about, which is called Granola.
I heard that.
I think it's granola.so. I have to quick look at it. It's like a meeting, like a note taker, but not trying to
Okay.
compete with like a Gong or Attention is one that we use internally, more for creating very succinct notes, which can then also be formatted in the right way, potentially to then synchronize into your CRM. Attention.tech that we use internally does that as well to certain extents.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if it would replace or be additive to that. But it's one that, again, I keep hearing about. So again, I've got to check it out. Otherwise, I feel like I'm missing something, getting a bit of FOMO.
Yeah. And perfect example there of like, there's so much noise in this. You'll hear new things all the time, and that little bit of FOMO can just like rear its head sometimes. You're like, I should definitely look at that. I should consider it. But I know you already, like you've already got a good and a consistent setup that just by looking at this, we've got good data options. It means you've got good coverage. You've got a means, the way you use LoneScale, your own solution, to build good, reliable lists that are segmented. They're in the right space. They're ICP, and you consistently work from HubSpot. Got some Lemlist in the background to just do some like air cover, I suppose. But you've got a nice lean stack already, so you've got those foundations. And now you're bringing in an SDR. They can slot straight in. They can continue to work through that without loads of distraction. They've got good data tools feeding the CRM. They can do most of their work consistently off that list in the CRM. And it's when you're at that point, I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at what else is just keeping your eye on what else is in the market to just further add a little bit of capacity to yourself or this SDR that's coming in. But you've got those foundations in place. That's
Exactly
when
that.
you consider other tools. You don't go around looking for other tools if you haven't got a nice clean foundation like this.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm a bit of a tech nerd when it comes to the point where most of my friends kind of mock me and joke around with me for liking SaaS a bit too much. But it's one where again I always like to keep my eye on it, as you mentioned, just to have a bit of curiosity of what's going on in the market, what are people doing. But I'm always putting the brakes on it in my own mind because, like you said, if the foundations aren't there and they're like consistent, then you're just buying for the sake of buying.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, lots of companies do that. And as a seller in my past career, and not so much at LoneScale, but when the market was particularly good, kind of pre, during, and slightly after COVID, everyone was buying everything. And ultimately, yes, for a seller, you're great. I'm sure the customer success teams were slightly less great at that stage, but it's obviously it's a big market shift that's occurred, and I think will only continue to be very efficient in how they work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Cory Lindsay, everyone. Thanks very much, Cory, for coming on. Great to hear like how you're tackling that early stage a founding a role and everything you've sort of learned about prospecting. Great to see you're focusing on the foundations of good list building, good data, testing messaging, iterating quickly, and coaching. And then you can bring in your SDR team and you're not going to drown them with different tools, overreaching. And yeah, great to see LoneScale doing well. I'm sure it's going to continue. And thanks for coming on. Everybody, please search Build with Stakki on YouTube, like and subscribe, and follow for more.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
Cory. Cheers. There you go. Easy as that.